who you are and where they can find you.
Yeah, so I'm Jocelyn. My website is jocelyneve.com. I work as a clinical social worker and group therapist in private practice in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I am hybrid, so also meeting with folks pretty much all over virtually. And I work primarily with adults, many of which who have some type of trauma history. I also run some groups, and that's something I'm excited to talk more about today, specifically a men's trauma group. And I also run a mixed gender trauma process group. So I talk a lot about groups, and I am excited to share more with you about that. But that's sort of the basics about who I am, and I'm very proud to share more about the work I do. I really love it and feel so lucky to do work that feels so meaningful and life-giving.
So take us through the genesis of your journey in regards to helping people in this way. Why did you get started and how did you get started?
Ooh, I love the question. I'm gonna peek at my notes too, because I don't want to get too, you have to rein me in if I get too all over the place. But I honestly like think I was one of those weirdo children who like wanted to be a therapist at age 8, which kind of says a lot because I had a mother who was a social worker. So I'm guessing that's how I attempted to spell psychotherapist in my journal. So I really from a young age saw myself as someone who wanted to help and someone who thought that I had some capacity to do good in the world. So I feel like that is also reflective of some of my kind of conditioning as a child of not just a social worker, but a family that really valued community service and tikkun olam. It's kind of repair the world is a phrase in the Jewish tradition that I was raised with. So yeah, I'd say a combination of like all of us, nurture and nature. I definitely was a more sensitive child, still am, very, very sensitive, highly sensitive, and the youngest of three. And so I really have a lot of vivid memories of being kind of a peacemaker in the fourth grade classroom, just setting up shop with some of my peers as a kid, trying to be play therapist. So I think a lot about sort of how gender kind of informs some of the personality traits that we develop, and sometimes it makes me feel sad, other times it makes me feel proud, but in this moment I'm really grateful to feel like those gifts of sensitivity that sometimes can feel like such a burden and so heavy, can also be a gift and an asset, and something that I can do some good with even when it's hard. So that's a
For
little bit
me,
about sort of the
no,
the
so go
early
ahead.
early genesis. But yeah, I can say a bit more. Like I think, like a lot of fellow group therapists, I think about sort of my experiences in groups and communities in our like ecosystems. So like, what was it like to be me as a kid, and how did my experience inform and shape um, yeah, wanting to become a group therapist, particularly like having experiences of bullying, for instance, for me, I think was really impactful as a child, and made me, hyper definitely sensitive to people who felt othered. And that kind of translated into getting involved in like anti-bullying work and the Gay Straight Alliance, just becoming involved in leadership roles and positions where I could kind of gravitate to like the new kid in the class, or just see. I seem to have like felt like I was a magnet for kids who were having hard times with their families. They ended up like kind of confiding in me. This is like middle school, high school, and um, I'd say like struggling with my own mental health in high school, having my first therapist, trying my first meds, like having my own journey in relationship to mental illness in my family has been really formative, and also made me very sensitive to, again, the kind of, so like, yeah, the dynamics that play out. So that I don't really see mental illness or trauma as something that is located in us as individuals, but rather sort of how are we, our little peaceful childlike beings, like then sort of impacted by the systems that we're in. So sometimes it's not feeling like I was in the best fit of a family, or not feeling like my needs might have been met in school or in work, and how those experiences of discrimination or ableism, or kind of insert form of kind of like oppression that intersects with my different identities. It sort of felt like I was had a calling, that it was sort of a, in some ways, a choice, but in another way, like I had to learn how to advocate for myself and other people to survive in the environment that I was living. And that sort of sounds dramatic, but that is sort of how I think back to those many decades of journaling and activism, that it was something that I took pride in. And also I was like looking for my people. I was looking for allies and teachers and mentors and mother figures and father figures, people who believed in me and saw that I had something to offer in the world.
For me, when I first got started, I knew what I wanted to do, but I just needed guidance on how to fulfill it. And I gave the example of the difference between doing something for your passion and something for your paycheck. Your paycheck, you can ultimately learn. We can go to school, we can get experience, things like that. But I think each and every one of us are born with a passion that we have to cultivate internally, and then it grows until it reaches a point where it comes externally. And I'll give you an example. When I was in my teens, I knew that I always wanted to help people. I just didn't know in what way or how, right? Because you're young and you're foolish and you're like, yeah, I'm going to become the king of the world. And your parents are going to be like, yeah, okay, go to school and let's figure it out. So when I ultimately decided to do that, it started within religion. And then I started to give talks. I was like, okay, I can do this. I can enjoy the talks. I didn't have the fear of public speaking, which so many people do. And I took that and I amplified it to the person I am now, where instead of just within the congregation, it was a congregation, and then it became the meeting of congregations. And now I'm in the spotlight and I'm around all these people. And it was a little bit simpler in a way because all I needed was the good book. Whereas from our conversation, you're an educated person and I'm an educated person. We've read many books outside of that. So it's a little bit different, right? You don't ever stop learning.
Mhm.
So I take that and I say that because when I hear you speak about it, it sounds like something that was inside you that you had to grow and show the world that you can do this because you've gone through these different types of situations. And as you're going through these different types of situations, you start to see a piece of you in every single person that you're helping. Was that a perspective that you had back then? Or is that something a little bit different where as you're helping people, you're looking at it in a different type of way?
Ooh, such a great question. Wow. I Yeah, I feel like people are people. Like the longer I work with people, the less I feel like there is any divide between us, and that kind of risks kind of invisibilizing the very significant, lived experiences and unique circumstances. So I mean that in the sense that I don't think that during my childhood and youth and coming of age, I felt like I saw myself in others. I think I looked for my story in books, and I looked. I remember, reading about all these like really intense, kind of scary stories that I felt so alone. I think I felt so different, and I didn't have language. Children, obviously, this, don't have words for a lot of the pain and experiences that they're going through, which in some ways is harder today with social media and technology, and in some ways, there is more access to information and affinity spaces. But I do think that looking back now, I certainly can see more of those like points of connection. Like it's sort of wild to look back and sort of see that thread. But if you had told me when I was, even though I'm telling you I had these sort of kind of unusual like awarenesses about sort of some of my gifts and some of my inclinations towards being a helper, I definitely couldn't have dreamed that I would be able to yeah, have a I don't know, get paid to do something so fulfilling, and that feels not like, it sounds cliche, but like it doesn't feel like work. Like it feels like, have you heard of the term like ikigai? It's like your life's purpose, where it's just sort of like, I don't know, it feels like a such a privilege to have work that it feels like you're doing what you love. And sure, I'm still human. I have days where work is exhausting and draining, and I can't wait for the weekend. But I know how unusual it is to feel the fulfillment and the sense of interconnectedness. Like I really want to highlight that, because I don't approach the work as like, yes, I have some education and training and I feel proud of that, and I work hard to like be like a lifelong learner. That's something I take very seriously, and I that fulfills me to always be learning. And like I feel like the relationship between myself and my clients is the healing agent, and that it's not about sort of being an expert and answering your problems and how can I fix you because you're so broken. It's like, no, like, we're gonna partner and I'm gonna join you, and helping to support, guide, shine a light on your path, and that I'm on one too, and that we're kind of in this together. So I feel like that's maybe something that a lot of people don't realize, maybe when they're approaching therapy. Obviously people look for different things in a therapist or a coach, but I'm certainly not someone who's looking to like market myself as someone who's like, yeah, gonna be the magic wand that takes you from this island to this one. Like I definitely believe in measuring like the outcomes and efficacy of what I'm doing. That I don't want to be in business. I want someone to sort of write me a letter in 5 years and tell me how happy and how fulfilled and how glad they are to be where they are. But I'm not, yeah, just kind of trying to recognize that I believe in the relationship as the kind of the main vehicle for change.
That's a beautiful way to say it. And I guess the comparison I have, since I spent a little bit of time in this industry, would be like the fitness industry and the fitness trainers, right? Where you have some that they have their clients and it's like a lifetime clients. No matter what they do, no matter what they're working on, they're with them for life, right? Just 10 more minutes on that treadmill and they're running and they're running and they're running and they're
Mhm.
running, right? And I think for therapists or coaches or people that are helping people grow in that way, we come across a lot of people who seem to be in the same spot in constant movement. They're not going anywhere, but they're always moving. And you're trying to steer them in a direction where they go from maybe a potential lifetime client to a lifetime success. And I think some people they misinterpret the difference because they may feel that I'm always going to need someone to guide me. And that is true. Like I need guidance and sounds like you have resolved that as well and you're into that as well. But it could be that you can go from Jocelyn to, let's say, you're guiding yourself, or Jocelyn just helping you maintain, or you're going from terrain and you're just maintaining. Because when I was working on myself, I can be reflective and say I needed someone at this point in my life because I wasn't sufficient for myself. Have you had those types of conversations within your own journey as you look back?
Hmm. Can you say a little bit more about the question? I want to make sure I understand in terms of those questions.
Absolutely. So for me, I'll give you an example. So in my 20s, I was struggling with the different types of relationships. I was
Mhm.
trying to navigate that section of my life, but there's a few things holding me back. One, I wasn't mature enough.
Mhm.
Looking back, at that
Right.
time, I felt I was the most mature person in the world, right?
Yep.
Um, Two, I wasn't ready for the type of relationships that I was trying to create. But at the time, I didn't know what I didn't know. So I can say that in hindsight because I have the experience and the education. But when you're going through it, as you pointed out earlier, you just don't know because you're trying to build the ship as you're flying it. So I guess my question for you now, to be more specific, is that as you look back, were there points in your life where you needed a little bit more? knowing what you know now?
Honestly, I hope it's okay to take this in a little bit of a different direction. Feel free to steer me back, but what you're sharing is making me think about some of the reasons that I think men are like underrepresented in therapy. Cause like I was thinking coming on to the show right now that the statistics show how common it is for men to have experiences of trauma and abuse, and yet it's so underreported, and they're so much less likely men to come into therapy, to coaching. I'm sure it's the same. And like why there's so many reasons for that, but I think one is this sort of myth of like this might not be where you're coming from at all, but it's just kind of what's coming to me, this like sense that you're supposed to just not be phased, and you're supposed to, as a man, have it figured out, and not to have to need anyone, not to show weakness. So yeah, I'm curious, kind of hearing your question. If I don't know if that's where you were going, but if that resonates at all for you.
It does, and that's where I was going because I mostly help women, and their perspective is a little bit different. Um, there's more available to them, right? Like, let's say if they're falling on hard times, or if there's like a mental health crisis, their resources is different and in more abundance. Whereas a man, and that's where when I look back, I'm like, okay, this is where I can use someone like a Jocelyn.
Mm-hmm.
This is where I could use someone, let's say like a terrain, where it was saying that these expectations that you're putting on yourself aren't necessarily fair because they haven't been earned. We all struggle. And I think for men specifically, they're trying to do one of two things. They're trying to say that I don't have to be this big, strong alpha male.
Mm-hmm.
And two, it's okay to tap into my emotions and say, hey, I don't know what I need to do to be successful. Is that where you come in? Where you're trying to guide them accordingly?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the men I work with present in therapy for like a range of different reasons, and it does seem like, yeah, if I'm reflecting on the folks I've worked with, that they don't have quite the same history of having exposure and opportunity, access to therapy, or if they do, they've been like pretty negative experiences. I'm thinking of someone who shared recently that they think they were having some trouble in college, and they got referred to the counselor, and they were like this very cold, removed person being like, you should probably get on meds, and they were like, okay, thanks, bye. So I think that there's a lot of barriers to not just accessing kind of the helping relationship, but also finding the right fit. So yeah, I'm curious. I mean, it sounds like of course people have traumas perpetrated by people across all genders. So some people might not want to join, a therapy group where I have a co-leader who's a male identified clinician, and there's me. So just sort of stating the obvious, but the research shows that it's all about the fit. And so I think that something I've been reflecting on is around the even within the field, the helping profession, like how much stigma there is about working with men. One of the big kind of moments of ahas for me a few years back was going to a conference about youth sex offenders. And I remember it was like my maybe mid to late 20s, like so astounded by how polarizing, like how siloed. I know that the field is full of silos. People are like in their corner, and they don't really know what's going on in another corner, even the same hospital or something. But people were talking about, I work with offenders, and I work with victims, or I work with perpetrators, and I work with survivors. And I was like, what is going on? This is bogus. Like, obviously, sometimes those categories might exist on their own, but there's, I think, more often than not, a lot of overlap. And I think that, I don't know, I'm a little bit kind of going astray, but just thinking about the importance of recognizing the complexity. It's hard to kind of speak in generalities at all, but that there's, a lot of important reasons that I think that it's so multifactorial, like the reasons that men are underrepresented, that they're not coming to therapy or coaching, even though they're suffering at disproportionate rates of suicide or depression or trauma. Like, so I like to think about like, what am I doing as a social worker to help to bridge that gap. And like doing conversations like this is one example, like doing outreach, letting people know who are listening that there are clinicians who see them more with more complexity and nuance than like you're more than the worst thing you've done and we're more than the worst things that have happened to us, right?
So take us through that. What are some of the ways that maybe men can become more comfortable approaching the situation and seeking out help to make sure that they are working on themselves, even though the resources may not be as available, but it's still out there. So what are some of the ways that they can work on themselves to get to that point?
Well, as I mentioned, so I feel like in this day of like everything being available, all the information, there are so many fantastic free resources online that I think can be like a really maybe the equivalent to when we were growing up and you could go in the corner of a bookstore and like find some books that kind of speak to you. Obviously, people still do that, but like I definitely encourage I'm a big proponent of sharing resources. So there's, menshealing.org, 1 in 6. There's so many great organizations, specifically menshealing.org, that focus on work with men. So NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, is another great one. So I feel like getting familiar on whether it's TikTok or Instagram or just the internet, like getting familiar with what's out there. It is for some people safer to explore things online. Now we have kind of free web chats, 24/7 hotlines. But you also, there's local services that people can go to support groups, neighborhood clinics. So I think that for everyone, it's going to look a little bit different. But my main thing that I'm always constantly repeating is shop around, like that you're in the driver's seat and to trust your instinct. I have a great article I like to share about like what to look for in a helper and a therapist, because I think that a lot of people come to look and they don't have any idea what's all involved, and it can feel very disempowering. So to me, it's about being transparent and like giving clients all the information they need. These are the different types of talk therapies. These are non-talk, these are alternatives, kind of like what it means to have a free or have a consultation with someone means kind of giving them all the information that they need to make a choice, and to know what else is out there, to help them know. I think that so much of trauma informed care to me is helping people to recognize that they do have choices. And unfortunately, in our mental health care system, that often does not feel like, even when you think about healthcare, you try to find a PCP or a specialist, and it's not like they're like, oh, here's 5 names, here's their bios, and here's their number, call that. Like, it's doesn't feel like a person-centered experience. And I really do what I can to try to help people to know that, just because you've been referred to me, like, these are like, I encourage you to shop around and to trust and to maybe, give it a couple sessions to see if it feels like a good fit, but that they're in the driver's seat, and that it's important that they feel like, that they are respected and that they're in a, safe enough place that they can do some deep work. But that kind of educating them on the therapy process is something that I think can be a big service to men who are just kind of beginning to put their toes in the water.